Hi.
Hi everyone. My name is Leo Hickman. I'm the editor of Carbon Brief, and welcome to our first ever live webinar from the Arctic. I myself am not in the Arctic, but my colleague Daisy Dunne, our associate editor, has travelled out to Svalbard in the past few days to join up with the British Antarctic Survey team based in Svalbard. And I'm really, really delighted that we've had this opportunity, and we're all keeping our fingers crossed that the connection is steady and true for the next hour. But we're going to hear from Daisy in just a moment, who's going to introduce this webinar. And then we're going to have a chance also to put your own questions to the team, the British Antarctic Survey team in Svalbard as well. So I think our connection is secure. Maybe Daisy just give me the thumbs up that you can see us and hear us. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well I'm going to hand over to you, Daisy, and yeah, I'm listening in with great interest. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Leo, and thank you all for joining us here from Ny-Ålesund, which is 79 degrees north in the Arctic Ocean on the Norwegian island of Svalbard. I'm joined here by two people from the British Antarctic Survey. First of all, I'm going to hand over to them to tell us a bit more about what we're doing out here, and then at any time you have any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them pretty quickly. So first, Henry, do you mind telling us a bit about your role, what you do here, and what the UK is doing in Ny-Ålesund?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Henry Burgess. I'm the head of the Natural Environment Research Council Arctic Office. We're hosted by British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge. And first of all, welcome to the UK's Arctic Research Station. We're funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, and we're here to provide a service to all researchers based in the UK. And as you can see from the flags behind us, we're actually open to the international community as well. And we are the UK's only permanent Arctic research presence. Through the British Antarctic Survey, we have ships and planes and lots of people and support other activities. But this facility here, this research station, is our only permanent footprint in the Arctic. And it's part of an international community here, as you've been seeing over the last few days. There are 10 countries here, 14 different research stations, and we all work very much in coordination to understand the change in this part of the Arctic. Because of course, as you and everyone knows, kind of the Arctic is changing and warming it much more quickly than the rest of the globe. The figures in Svalbard are particularly stark. So if the Arctic itself is warming perhaps 4 times more quickly than the rest of the globe, in Svalbard over the last 50 years where we are, we've seen particularly winter temperatures warm dramatically. So over the last 50 years, this part of Svalbard is now over 7.5 degrees warmer on average than it was in a typical winter. So that's stark change. So all the more reason that we do the science here, that we do it urgently and quickly and high quality, and that's what our station helps to support.
Thank you, lots to unpack there. And Dorothea, you're a researcher. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do and what brings you to Ny-Ålesund?
I think Henry has given us the perfect plot here, because I'm an ice core researcher towards the end of my PhD, so soon to submit a thesis. And my work is centered around ice cores that are melt affected. And specifically here in Ny-Ålesund, my work is centered around doing snow experiments during the winter, during which rain on snow events are becoming ever more frequent. So we're not just experiencing snowfall during winter, but rainfall, which is unusual in the historic context. And my experiments try to simulate the process of rain on snow to explore how melting is affecting ice as climate archives, because climate change is a threat to that archive, I would say.
Thank you. So we are going to open up to questions very shortly. So if you have any questions, anything at all, please put them in the Q&A box. I guess while we're waiting for some to come in, I can ask you both maybe to comment on what are some of the challenges about doing research out here. I know that you have to prepare for things like polar bears and permafrost melting. Do you want to speak a bit about that, Henry?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of the reason why our station has been successful over the last 30 years is because safety and care and good preparation and planning is central to everything that we do here. So there's a complicated yet straightforward process to go through to make sure that before people come, they know what they're going to do, that their science is appropriate and needed, that they plan for it, and that safety and effectiveness is right at the forefront. And we have a very capable team here to support people out in the field. So from here, we can do boating operations in the fjord. You can see on the map behind us here, kind of our station is located just behind Daisy, where your head is, Daisy. So you can see that we can access the fjord from here, the Arctic Ocean. We can access the land, the glaciers, the snowfields. It's a really diverse terrain, but in all of those, making sure that we keep ourselves and we keep the wildlife here as safe as possible, that we have the minimum possible impact, because that's why this is a particularly good community to do research in, because there's one port, there's one airstrip, there's one place where we all eat from all the different countries. So we're minimizing as much as we possibly can our human footprint and our carbon footprint for working here. But yeah, safety for everything living and the environment itself is central in what we do.
Okay, and Dorothea, you have to do polar bear training, so how to know how to react to a polar bear. Do you mind explaining why that training is necessary and sort of briefly what it involves?
Of course. So I think the first question is, how do we approach this? And it's a question of attitude, that we are entering a habitat that is not ours, and that we are mindful of entering something that is not human dominated, but we're exploring and we're researching what is already present. And polar bear protection says it in the word, that we are trying to protect both us as researchers and the polar bear when we do anything in terms of protection measures. That includes when we're out in the field, that we carry binoculars and are vigilant of any wildlife that is surrounding us, and that we are then communicating well as a group, that we're all active participants in whatever measures need to be taken. And then if any danger still should arise, that we are not just retreating, but that we can defend ourselves with flares, just to say that we're scaring away the polar bear and is creating more distance between us in a defensive way. And of course, we have to carry something with us that would protect us in a really defensive way, that is a weapon. But so well, we will never have to use it. And during the last 30 years, we have never had any incidents that was lethal or a dangerous encounter of that kind. So I think the measures that we are taking and the procedures that are in place are successful in actually ensuring good research under safe conditions.
Cool, thank you. We're having a couple of questions starting to come in, so I'll get straight to them. Thank you very much, everyone. So the first one's from Peter Stotts. I'm guessing the scientist Peter Stotts. Is the base open during winter as well as the summer months? Henry, do you want to answer that?
Yes, so the station here is quite different to our Antarctic stations in Antarctica, in that all the countries rent their facilities from our Norwegian hosts. So it's our station, but we rent it, and we have a long-term lease for the station. So the station tends to be open from sort of early March through to the end of August, kind of early September, kind of early October. That tends to be a typical season, but yes, it can open at any point of the year. To be as efficient and to be as low impact as possible, what we will do is we will send up the team here, the station manager and the scientists. They will come up when they need to. They'll work for a week or 2 weeks or a month, and then they'll go back to the UK. So we don't have the station open when it doesn't need to be. But yeah, the station can open at any time of the year. And if someone has a really good idea for what they would like to do in the winter, when of course it's 24 hours darkness for several months, then very happy for people to suggest that and to make it work. That's definitely open to that.
During the winter, the space where the community could be especially interested in this location, I would say.
Yeah.
And I, for example, have been doing my research at the end of winter when sun has been returning, and we were approaching the melt season. So depending on the demand in the scientific community, this station has been really accommodating.
Yeah. And if people are interested in using the station, you can find out all about it on the Arctic Office website, arctic.ac.uk, and you can find out all the information about the station, how you apply, what it's like. You can get an up-to-date kind of webcam picture of what it's like here. So yeah, please do. If you're interested in using the station, please do. It's open to everyone.
Great, thank you. We've got another question from Tom Harris, which I think you'll be able to answer hopefully. How far back in time do the ice cores from Svalbard reach?
Well, the ice cores from Svalbard reach back into the last ice age. So around 8,000, 12,000 years old, depending on where we are in Svalbard. So the ice cap has parts that are thicker and its outflowing glass is towards the rims. And of course, the outflow is just the remnant of the past. And the central parts high up at greater elevation, they have thicker records, longer term records. But that is the furthest we can go back in time.
Cool, thank you. Another question from Elizabeth Ortiz. You mentioned international scientists. Could you please speak more about how you interact with scientists from other countries? I think you probably both have an answer for this. So Henry, do you want to go first? And then...
Yeah, I guess it would be in two ways. So here at the UK station, we're open to all researchers who are based in the UK. And beyond that, if researchers based outside the UK have a connection with UK-based researchers, they can come here and be part of the team and work. But we're also part of European Union, European Commission-funded science programs, so that researchers from outside the UK can apply to use the station, take that European Union funding and come and kind of be based here. So we have lots of international teams here. Just outside the door here in the laboratories and in the field, we've got lots of researchers who are here from the University of Ghent and elsewhere, and that's just typical of what we will help to support. And then there's a wider community here in Ny-Ålesund itself of these 10 other countries. We have China, the Netherlands, India, Korea, France, Germany, I'm going to lose track, but Italy, and you get a sense of the nature here. And there's definitely collaboration between all those different countries. We try and make sure that we're not duplicating each other. So if someone's doing one particular kind of science in the fjord or in the atmosphere or on land, then we don't duplicate that. But there's also a place for, in successive years, kind of doing similar things. So you're getting a succession of data over different years. But we also make sure that there are what we call flagships here. So there's a marine flagship program, for example, so that all the ideas from all the countries that are represented get put into that flagship, and we can have a longer term plan of the science that can happen here.
And I would say that projects tend to be designed collaboratively.
Yeah.
So even smaller scale fieldwork campaigns like mine have been designed in collaboration with the Italian station, with Norwegian collaborators, and it just means that we're tapping into a wealth of knowledge and existing logistical and experience resources that are already existing. And that just facilitates better science here in this location and to create better impact for the Arctic. But it also creates a good relationship between the scientists and establishes relationships that we can tap into even beyond this research location.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here, something actually we were talking a bit about yesterday from Matthias Ulrich. Do you observe more precipitation, more rainfall? Yeah, I don't know if either of you want to have a go at answering that. Yeah, go for it. Dorothea.
Yeah, we're talking about the warmer, wetter Arctic. So indeed, the temperatures are rising in the Arctic rapidly, but it's also getting wetter. And part of that, specifically from my perspective, is more rain during winter as well. And that is crucial for this ecosystem, including reindeer, because if rain percolates or trickles through the snowpack during winter, it will potentially probably refreeze at the latest at the bottom when it reaches the permafrost, which is frozen fully at that time of year. And that means that there will be a basal ice layer at the surface of the permafrost that will hinder the reindeer feeding on the moss and everything that is on the tundra surface. So actually it's a big problem for reindeer here in this area.
Yeah, and we're also seeing kind of effects within the community itself of the increased rainfall. So the fact that we're having more warmer events and more rain in the winter, and particularly in the summer, is increasing the active layer, the non-frozen layer of the ground. And all the buildings here are on stilts into the permafrost. And because that active layer is getting deeper, then it's beginning to shift and tilt some of the buildings. So the building next to us here, over the last couple of years, they've had to put that on a metal frame, move it to one side, redig the piles, and then put it back again. And that affects all the infrastructure here in Ny-Ålesund and also in the main town of Svalbard in Longyearbyen. So yeah, human effects as well as environmental effects.
I guess it needs to be remembered that rain means energy because it's warm, and any refreezing that is meant to happen here will raise the temperature of the permafrost, the snow, everything that's here.
Okay, great. That kind of leads me on quite nicely to the next question, which is from Bryony Collins at Carbon Pulse, which is a publication, an environmental publication. What are the key changes that you have noticed in the region due to climate change in recent years? And what are the concerns for how things could accelerate in the next 5 to 10 years? Don't know who wants to, do you want to have a go and start answering?
It's a big one. So
Do you want to start?
we might take turns
Yeah, sure.
and
Yeah,
expand on all
yeah.
the different facets of climate change in the Arctic, I would say. So first of all, rising temperatures mean a retreat of glaciers. That means mass loss of something that has been characteristic to this region. It means a loss of an archive. It means that there's water discharge from the glaciers into the fjord system. It just means a rebalancing of normal flows of nutrients that are coming from the glaciers into the fjord system. That is quite crucial. It also means a loss of water resources because the glaciers are the only drinking water in comparison to the seawater. That is a big change for the glacier system. So retreat and mass loss there. There's also a shift of several of the marine terminating glaciers to land-based. That is sort of an extreme case of what I said about the shift in nutrient input. Do you want to take it for something else?
Yeah, and I think particularly the thing to stress, as you can see from the map behind us, you know, where we are here is a perfect example of the connected ecosystem of the Arctic. So you see the snow and the permanent ice layers, you see the exposed rock, you see the sea, and because we're on the western edge of Svalbard, we're next to all that warm water, that current coming up from the North Atlantic, and as that water gets warmer, that's making this part of Svalbard particularly kind of change dramatically, and that's where those dramatic facts and figures come in. And one of the reasons why this is such a good place to do research nationally but internationally is because you can see all those ecosystem changes all in one place. So we're finding new fish species are coming into the fjord, we're finding new seabirds are breeding here, whereas they may have only been visiting in the past. The whole ecosystem, right from the tiniest kind of diatoms, phytoplankton, all of that is all the way up the ecosystem is being affected and is changing in ways and at speed that no one has ever seen in kind of a human lifetime.
And I think another key assessment that we're doing here is the sea ice changes. I mean, the changing sea ice in the Arctic is maybe a buzzword, but it is real. And currently the sea ice is retreating at a rate of 12.2% per decade. And while in the 1980s there were still 7 million square kilometers of sea ice during the minimum sea ice extent during summer, which we're now sort of approaching, we're now at a level of 4 million. And this upcoming minimum sea ice extent will be potentially the second lowest ever recorded. It will at least be in the top 10 of our lowest records. So that is definitely noticeable. And I would describe the sea ice as the interface or the face of the ocean, because it is literally the interface between ocean and atmosphere. So we can see any dynamic that is going on, that interplay between ocean and atmosphere in that expression. And especially if the winter sea ice extent is changing, and if in the winter we see the ocean evaporating and releasing heat, that for us as researchers is an indicator that the ocean is becoming a more active player in climate change. It has so far taken up a lot of energy from the temperature rise, but now the ocean has been stretched to its capacity, and it is now releasing a lot of that energy because it simply can't take up any more of our temperature increase that we're imposing. And that then is especially visible during winter, while we're now also seeing, or have already been seeing, the change in the summer sea ice extent. So I think it shows that there's a dynamic here that is not linear, and it's shifting in recent years.
Thank you. We're getting quite a lot of questions about climate impacts, so I think we should probably stay on that for a moment. So you mentioned oceans there. We've had a couple of questions. I'll read them out from Philip Port Sarno, can you tell us about the ocean temperatures around Svalbard? Has there been research on the effect on ocean currents? And relatedly, we've had Josephine Ingenol. How do you expect ocean streams and circulations to change in the Arctic area through climate change in the next years? So questions about ocean circulation patterns and currents. Do you feel comfortable talking a bit about that?
Well, I know lots of colleagues who would be able to talk about that in depth. So I would feel more comfortable pointing that to them and come back with an in-depth answer that I have fact-checked properly. I'll have a think for a moment and might come back to that if I.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah, I mean, this part of the Arctic, as many of you will know, is an absolutely connected, linked system through its ocean into the global ocean system. So all of that warm water coming up from the North Atlantic, coming in kind of towards the surface, coming into the Arctic, cooling, sinking, going back out, kind of feeding that global kind of circulation through the oceans. And although the water here is relatively shallow, you don't have to go too far to the west until you're in that deep trench, thousands of meters deep. It's funneling all that water kind of into the Arctic, and it's just offshore here is that main channel into the Arctic Ocean. And so it's a really central part of the work that happens in and around Svalbard. So there are a series of moorings, deep water moorings on the seabed and in the water column above that are maintained by Germany and Norway and other countries. And those are visited on a regular basis to gather the data, because we need to understand more about what's happening to that current, kind of the speed, the pace of it, the salinity, all of that kind of thing. I don't have those exact findings to hand, but it's a big part of the work that is happening. And there is a sense that what's happening to the North Atlantic current, of course, the AMOC, the overturning circulation, all of that will have a big impact in the Arctic. But what we're beginning to realize more and more is that with the change that's happening in the Arctic will have a reciprocating effect on the current itself.
And I've just remembered that there has been a mission this summer from BAS researchers going to Greenland, and they have been investigating how the freshwater influx from Greenland glaciers is actually influencing the ocean circulation at large. And I think that points us towards the urgency of that sort of research, because what happens in the Arctic does not stay here. It literally affects the ocean circulation by far beyond. And that project, Klac, and other missions in a similar way are really exploring how it will affect climate in Europe and the Gulf Stream or similar.
Yeah, that's right. And you can find out more about that Klac mission on the British Antarctic Survey website. And as you said, kind of that ship is on its way back from Greenland now. It's just about to get back to Scotland for its refit, and then it will go back to Antarctica. But that's the beginnings of this ship's work in the Arctic, for sure.
Okay, we've got a question about ecosystems from Dominic Wyard. Are you noticing any changes in animal ecosystem behaviour, brackets migration, hunting, etc., as a result of observed warming?
Yes, the changes here are kind of quite well, the amount of species that are here in terms of large mammals, the majority of the large mammals here will be polar bears and reindeer. There's a particular kind of Svalbard reindeer, but the biggest mammals, of course, the ones in the oceans. People do occasionally see blue whale in the fjord, and that's a rare occurrence, but is happening. Whales, of course, were hunted here for hundreds of years, and thousands of whales and seals were taken. So with animals that have that kind of very long lifespan, what we're probably seeing is some of the rebounding from the hunting period. But it's easier for a seal species to rebound because their lifespans are shorter, and walrus too. But with a whale, it's a very long lifespan. So disentangling for those large mammals, what's a rebound from hunting pressure and what's actually tied in with warming and human-induced climate change is a bit tricky to disentangle. But that's some of the work that's happening around here for sure.
And I think when it comes to the most famous Arctic inhabitant, the polar bear, then we have been hearing that they have shifted their diet slightly from the most common food, the seals, to nevertheless protein rich geese eggs, because that is available. And that definitely is an indicator of food resources being available or shifting based on the needs. And a couple of weeks ago, a polar bear has been observed to hunt a reindeer, and that was definitely a first. So diet and behavior are changing following the changing conditions and what food resources are available.
And you can exactly right, Dorothea. You can see the results of that just in one of the neighbouring buildings here, out of the window on the doorstep. There's a little pile of what looks like kind of broken shell eggs, and it is broken shell eggs from geese and other birds, and that's sort of a semi-fossilized polar bear vomit, basically, where the polar bear has been raiding birds' eggs and eating chicks and other things, and has kind of been unable to process the shell, and so that comes out in the same way that you get an owl pellet or something like that. And so that's a very visual representation of that kind of change, moving from eating very blubber-rich, kind of high-calorie seals into kind of scavenging behavior.
Okay, great. Got lots and lots of questions coming in. Thank you so much. Please do keep sending them in, and we're going to try and get through as many as we can. So changing tack slightly, we've got Richard Patterson. Is all of your research done around the base, or do you go out on expeditions?
Should I start with that one? Yeah, so it's a real mixture here. Some of the research stations that are run by other countries are solely laboratories in their facility. But here we have a real mixture. So just outside the door, we have our laboratories here. We have 4 laboratories. So people can do a lot of work here in the laboratories. But the majority of the work we do here is field-based. So people will go out for a day on snowmobiles, skidoos in March, April time, go right to the kind of the head of the fjord, which is sort of 20-25 kilometers away. Do their work, collect their samples, come back here to the station and kind of process them. Equally, we have a boat and we can access the fjord that way. So it's a real mixture. Some of it is really round the station itself. Just outside the window here, you can see the kind of the tundra and the low shrub growth and the rock and kind of glaciers further on. So some of it will be really close to the base. Others will be an hour or so away. But Dorothea, you were working just in the last couple of winters?
Yeah, so I think research here is quite diverse, and it's possible to do a lot of things at close distance, which is one of the reasons why this place is unique. For example, I have been sampling in a snowfield slightly up the slope towards the nearest glacier, and that is a seasonal snowfield, so that's not that far away, but it lended itself to my process-focused studies. But other projects, ice core drilling projects, normally go into the field. And just last spring, there has been a larger project, an international collaborative project from the Ice Memory Foundation. They were going up to Holtedalfonne, a bigger ice cap a few hours from here, and they camped on the ice. So those larger drilling campaigns are quite common in ice core research, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of logistics to transport all our equipment to the respective location. And that then includes camping on the ice, setting up the entire drill equipment, drill tents potentially, and in that case, moving the location because they faced melting conditions. So those are the deeper field projects, and they are happening both here in the Arctic from the British Antarctic Survey, but also in the Antarctic. So we've got a bigger drilling campaign coming up this winter, and next winter I will probably get to go to drill several shorter profiles on one of the West Antarctic ice shelves. So there's a diversity of projects even within that discipline, and this terrain lends itself to a diverse range of experiments and studies.
And just to add, kind of one of the things that we do here, as well as research in itself, we test equipment, we test processes that can be deployed in other locations. So we're, coming out from the UK, although we're only kind of less than 1,000 miles from the North Pole, you can be here in a day and a half or so from the UK. People can stay for a week. It's not too expensive to work here. So some people would like to test their equipment here if they're going to use it in Antarctica. We've had people test radar here that's then been subsequently flown from helicopters in the Himalayas. So it's a really good place to come and test equipment and test ideas and processes, as well as doing kind of Arctic science itself. We're here for that.
Great. Another question from Louise Radis. Do you ever get tourists wanting to have a look around your research station?
We do. So where we are in Ny-Ålesund here is a community of 50 or so buildings. In the summer, kind of 100, 150 people here just for the summer, kind of working. But it is a year-round community, and all through the winter there will be sort of 20, 25 people here, keeping the place warm and the buildings kind of lit and safe. But we also have a port down at the harbour, and so yes, cruise ships can come in. They're not the enormous 1,000-person cruise ships that you would expect. They tend to be around 200 people, but they can moor up and they come ashore. We have a museum in the community. People can go to the post office. So we have the most northerly post office in the world. You can buy a postcard, kind of buy a stamp and send it from here. So tourism is a natural part of the community. There have been people here since the early 1900s, initially mining coal. And then there was a tourist industry in the 1920s and 30s. So tourism here in Ny-Ålesund and Svalbard is at least 100 years long. So yeah, we welcome tourists. We don't let them come into the station because we're quite small and there's 200 of them, but we're very pleased to see them. And if we see them out and about, very happy to talk and chat and explain what we're doing. That's very happy to do that.
Great. This is a very interesting question. I'm not sure if either of you will know the answer, but it seems that you know quite a lot, so you might do. Kate Taylor, with retreating glaciers, have any archaeological sites or artifacts been discovered? Have you guys heard about anything about that?
Good question.
The simple answer is yes. And that is just due to the fact that anyone who's travelled across the glacier in ancient history, so might have lost a spear, might have lost some of their tools, may have even died while travelling across glaciers, and then become buried with subsequent snowfall. And those sort of artifacts have been flowing within the ice and are now being emitted, one might say, at the front of the glacier as it is melting. So retreating glaciers are indeed associated with new finds of historic artifacts, and that is both biological, ecological, but it's also human tools and remains that are being discovered. So it is an interesting period because it means uncovering parts of our past, not just climatological, but also human history.
We're right to say, Dorothea, that's not so much in Svalbard, but in other locations, because here in Svalbard, there's potentially evidence that the Vikings were here, kind of 900 years or so ago. There's probably evidence that the people called the Pomors in what's now northern Russia would have come here as well, hunting and sealing. But the island Svalbard were only discovered officially in 1596 by William Barents, a Dutch explorer. And then for hundreds of years after that, there were just people who were here as sealers and whalers, and then eventually a coal mining community in the early 1900s. So the evidence of human history here is probably not so much in the glaciers, but you can see it on the shoreline. Yeah, let's see what comes out in the future.
I mean, here we have lots of coal mining infrastructure that is preserved as historical artifacts, so that has not been buried by glaciers, but there is still a sense of protection of cultural heritage in this place. And what I said about the historical remains, that applies more broadly to the alpine glaciers in mainland Europe and other locations where humans have been settling for a lot longer, I would say.
Right, yeah, the history here is really fascinating. Learning all about the expeditions and stuff that have taken place from here as well. Let's move on to the next question from Brett Jacobs. How closely are governments following and engaging with you on the station's research and findings? I guess you might want to comment on that.
Yes, very much. So the station is operated by the British Antarctic Survey, and it's funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. So the station here is provided essentially through government money, through public money. So we are absolutely accountable for what we do and how we spend it. And a good proportion of the research that takes place here is similarly funded by UKRI or by the National Environment Research Council. So all of that data will become publicly available. All of that work is to support priorities established by the research councils and eventually by government. And there are, I think it's fair to say that scientists are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of sharing their information in ways that are not just accurate and true with the scientific community, but are impactful and straightforwardly understandable by people outside as well, by policy and decision makers. And that's as much inside government as it is elsewhere. So here in the station, we've hosted in the past visits by members of parliament. In April 23, both Dorothea and I were here during a visit of the Environmental Audit Committee, a select committee of the UK Parliament, which was looking into the changing Arctic environment and the UK's position and response to that. So literally bringing kind of those decision makers here to the station to show them firsthand kind of your science and other people's is really important to us. So yeah, we are increasingly conscious of reaching out in understandable, straightforward, accurate ways.
And one can definitely say that they were interested and were carefully listening and engaging with what we were presenting. And they even got involved with some of my research and got hands-on when it came to that.
Yeah.
Great. So I've got another question here from you and Donald. What steps are being taken to minimise the impacts of human activity in this precious region as you conduct your vital research? And as a suggestion, they say electrified vehicles and things like that, or?
Yes, we are increasingly conscious of the impact that we have here. And as I said before, the fact that we are all located in this one location, the impact we have here is significant, and we recognize that, but it's localized. And so there is one airport, one port, one power station, one place where everyone eats together. And that's for community reasons, but it's also to reduce our impact. And before people come to the station, if they have an idea or a project, we make sure that their work actually needs to happen here, that it's work that can only happen in Ny-Ålesund, that they have to come here, rather than it's something they could do somewhere else, kind of in the Arctic without as much impact, or it can be done in the UK or somewhere else. So there's a quality standard that's applied. And then when people are here, we try and make sure that they work in a way that's as minimal impact as possible. The only way of generating power here is through a generator, and that's a diesel generator. And we recognise the impact of that. That's run by our Norwegian hosts for the whole community. They are thinking actively about ways to change that. And in Longyearbyen, which is the main town of Svalbard, sort of half an hour flight to the south of us here, they had a coal-fired power station that's now changed over to diesel effectively, and they are thinking very actively about what the future looks like for renewables. So it's likely to be a combination of solar, wind, heat pump, kind of batteries, all of that kind of thing, because of course it's 24-hour daylight in the summer, it's 24-hour daylight in the dark, it can be windy, but sometimes it's not windy, so you've got all of those kind of complications. And it is a matter of life and death here, because in the winter it can get down to -20, -25, and if you don't heat a building, then people aren't going to survive. So having a consistent power source for everyone is a genuine matter of life and death.
And even for our research projects, there are lots of measures that we're taking to reduce our impact. So when we design our projects, then we are thinking of any sort of traces that we might leave, both human, if we're out in the field, how can we avoid leaving our traces? But also if we need to deploy the equipment, is it retrievable? Does it need to be deployed? Some of the other projects have used wind turbines to power their batteries to keep equipment running. Yeah. And I, for example, wanted to make something visible, making the percolation of rain through the snow visible. And I used very simply food dye, which is non-toxic, because I wanted to make sure that I'm not leaving an impact to any of the soil. So those are the little things, but they are crucial, and they are closely monitored by the local government here, so that you are actively thinking about your impact and are consciously making decisions.
And one of the things we're conscious of is our own human impact on this environment, but also other people's human impact on this environment. So we supported a couple of projects last year that were looking at kind of plastic and other marine pollution on the shores here, because that's not coming from this location, that's coming in from kind of offshore, from the fishing industry, or from elsewhere. And so understanding that is kind of a part of the wider process of understanding the ecosystem.
Okay, we've got a sort of related question from Hazel Crawford, which is, you mentioned before about how cruise ships sometimes stop here. She's asking, do these cruise ships cause any damage? Is there a question that they should, be monitored or regulated more?
Yeah, it's absolutely not a free-for-all in the cruise industry. It is incredibly heavily regulated. So large cruise ships cannot come into the fjords now in Svalbard. There have been lots of changes about what fuel cruise ships will use. So cruise ships in and around Svalbard can't use what they call HFO, heavy fuel oil, which is that kind of thick, kind of oily crude. They can't use that fuel anymore. So that reduces some of the sulfur emissions from the engines. Ships will need to comply with kind of very strict regulations to be in Svalbard, and the number of people that can land on sites in Svalbard is heavily restricted. So it's not ships more than 200 people that can land, and all the cruise ships are part of an organization called AECO, which is AECO, and they are a cruise industry body which regulates Arctic operations. And they have a very strict code of avoiding pollution, avoiding introduction of non-native species on people's boots or kind of jackets or something else like that, about kind of being aware of their surroundings and having absolute minimal impact. And they have a program too of marine and beach clear up. So a good friend of ours, a good friend of the station, who's sadly no longer with us, Sarah Orfrey, who worked for AECO, she instituted this program of beach cleanups by the cruise ships landing in Svalbard. So when they would land on a beach, as well as seeing what there is to see, they would take fishing net or other plastic away with them on the cruise ship and dispose of it safely in Longyearbyen. So it's a heavily regulated industry.
It's really interesting, thank you. So just to say, we've got just under 20 minutes left, so please keep sending in your questions and we're going to keep going through them. We've got one specifically about Dorothea's research from Terry Muir. Are you able to provide a summary of one or two of the most significant findings from your ice core research?
Yes, happy to do that. Very happy to do that. So I am studying melt affected ice cores, which is crucial because melting is becoming more of an issue for ice cores around the world with rising temperatures. And it's in the ice cores that I've studied, I do see that certain chemical proxies, ions that are in the ice and are traces of aerosols from ocean sources, sea spray, the sea ice, or other biogenic sources, they are being washed away with water trickling through the firn, through the porous matrix that is then frozen into ice. So that is the problem, and my research has provided one of the stepping stones to making sense of those altered archives by providing a literature review. So the first thing to do when you're approaching a new topic is always to summarize what already exists, and I'm stepping into a field where a body of literature exists, but it's never been compiled in a way that is providing a stepping stone. So one of my key results has been that there is a wealth of knowledge available, but we've never made most use of it by combining it and by considering melt affected ice cores not skeletons in the closet, but something worth investigating. So in certain parts of ice core research, maybe more in the polar regions, researchers were concerned about these features because we know they are an issue, but there was maybe a concern, how can we still make sense of it, and should we just avoid it? But with it not being avoidable, bringing this body of literature together has meant that we're realizing there is more we can do. this is not a lost cause. Certain chemical species, especially the insoluble particles that are more dust-like, they are more stable. So we can use those particles to reconstruct the climate instead of relying on maybe more common but soluble species in the ice. I think that's one of the key takeaways, that we might need to adjust what we are measuring in the ice, but then we can still make sense of it. And another finding I would take away is that combining structure and chemistry assessments is quite crucial, because ice core records that we present are often chemical, but the archive is made up by the material ice. So we not only see the impact of melting in our chemical records that we interpret for climate reconstruction, but we can also see it visually as these features in the ice. So there's a structural change associated with melting and refreezing. And when we combine both structure information and chemistry information, then it's a lot easier to make sense of the degree of alteration, the degree of melt impact, and then it will help us in the future to maybe reconstruct what would have been there if there had not been any melting, if we use all of the information available. So those are maybe two messages from my research, but happy to talk about that more if you're of interest.
That's great, thank you. We've got another question specifically about your research from Stephen Roderick. After taking an ice core, do you cap the borehole?
Good question. So I have never drilled that deeply to face that issue, but because glaciers are moving bodies of ice, actually the borehole will close by the simple movement of the ice. So you don't actually have to fill it. The glacier itself will fill it quite within a short amount of time. And you actually need to put drilling fluid into the borehole to maintain the opening. So it's actually the opposite issue. You don't have to fill it back in, you have to keep it open during the drill campaign. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So we've got another question from the scientist Peter Stotts. There are fascinating artifacts behind you. Could you tell us a bit about them?
Oh, yeah. So the polar bear head that's behind Dorothea. Do you want to pick that up, Dorothea?
Yeah.
So this is the product of a fancy dress costume party that was held here some time ago. This is the vertebra. You can kind of just see it here of a whale. So I've asked before when I've been here about whether this is the thickest bit of the whale, if you like. So this is potentially quite a small whale, if this is the biggest bit, or whether actually this is the smaller bit of a very, very large whale. So no one's been able to tell me. Potentially it's from a blue whale. It's been collected long time ago from the shores of Svalbard because there was a whaling industry here. So that's not something that's been recently collected. That's kind of been here a long time at the station. But I can't tell you what species it is, but definitely from a whale and a big one, likely. And then we have here some fossils. We have quite a large fossil collection here at the station. The rocks that are here, Svalbard's very interesting because it's a very there's very old rock here, basement rock here, but also lots of other time periods are captured here in the rock, and the glaciers have an amazing effect of scouring the mountains and bringing lots of that kind of to life, basically. So 60% of Svalbard is covered in glacier. You can see that from the map behind us, but the bits that aren't are a geologist's, a paleologist's kind of dream, basically. And so I don't know whether you can see this, but this has got little bits of shell. Shall I hold it close to the camera?
Close to the camera. See if it
Can
picks
you
up.
see some of that? Little bits of shell in there, and that's typical of what's found here. But you can find kind of creatures like that. But also, particularly, you can find fossilized plants. So in the shales and kind of similar rocks, you can get ferns and kind of similar things. The fact that there was coal here is a good indication of the fossils. So coal was being laid down 40, 50 million years ago, something like that, exactly at the time of those plant fossils and other things. So yeah, it's a really good place for fossils.
And from a geologist's point of view, it's the perfect spot for geologists because we don't have the vegetation here.
Yeah.
So any geologist will know that vegetation can be quite tricky for doing their work, and the Arctic is quite sparse on that one.
Great. Well, thanks, Peter, for giving us a chance to show off some of that stuff we have behind us. Another question from Lynn Patterson. Dorothea mentioned the local government that is here. Can you describe how that operates? Are they elected?
Yes. So Svalbard was sort of discovered in the late 1500s, and for hundreds of years it was essentially kind of no man's land. It was a free-for-all in terms of whaling and sealing. There's never been an indigenous population here. It's not like Canada or Greenland. So this is not a place where Inuit or Sami or other people have ever lived, as far as anyone's been able to tell. So in the early part of the 1900s, when coal mining was established, it was realized that they needed some form of government here. So as part of the Treaty of Versailles, after the First World War, there was a Svalbard Treaty. And it was decided that sovereignty for the whole of the island of Svalbard should be given to Norway. So Svalbard is part of the Kingdom of Norway. And the treaty says that anyone that's a signatory to the treaty, all their citizens can come and live and work in Svalbard as long as they are self-sufficient. There's no visa to get here. There's no passport required in that sense. It's part of the Kingdom of Norway, but it's not part of mainland Norway itself. But it's Norwegian regulations that apply to everyone. So here in Ny-Ålesund, we're a small community. There isn't a mayor or a town council. All the services are provided by the Kings Bay Company, which used to be the coal mining company. It now services the town. But in the main town of Longyearbyen, there is a mayor who's elected by the residents of Longyearbyen. And for the whole of Svalbard, there's a governor, what they call a sysselmann. And that's someone who's appointed by the Norwegian government, and they take care of all the administration and the police and the Coast Guard and the search and rescue. So it's an interesting and pretty unique governance system for the whole of the archipelago.
But I think it's worth noting that from a scientific point of view, there is a council for the scientific management. Yeah. So there is a body of the station leaders and the different nations that are involved in research here that comes together on a regular basis to assess what research is being planned in this location, and to make sure that there is no duplication, that it's actually really helpful and it ties in with the various flagships that are being researched here in Ny-Ålesund. So I think that shows that there is both the government level, but there's also research management and operation that is quite collaborative. Yeah.
And while we're on the topic of just life in Ny-Ålesund, do you mind telling us a bit about what you guys eat? What's a day? How do you relax? You mentioned that there was a party here. I'm sure people would be keen to hear a bit more about that.
Dorothea, you researched it. Do you want to talk about what a day in the life of a researcher is like?
I think the day in the life of a researcher starts with preparation of the fieldwork. So you really have to bring everything that you need for your project up to this station. So in some way our days start months ahead, and we really think through what do we need from getting up to going to sleep, any sort of equipment, and when we're then here, we first go to breakfast at the mess, which is operated by Kings Bay, and they provide really good food. I can definitely say that. And after that, it will be our intention to get out of the building as quickly as possible, because obviously time in the field is precious and you want to make use of your time wisely. And whenever the weather is good enough, you will definitely go out as quickly as possible. That means packing all the centrifuge and tubes, all shovels, digging equipment, anything, especially your notebook, that will be crucial. But also the safety equipment. So you'll have a chat with the station manager to discuss your plans for the day, so that it also complies with what is happening on other teams, so that you're safe wherever each team goes. And then you will get your stuff, maybe a packed lunch, a hot thermos might be recommendable. and then off you go. You'll leave the village, walk, depending on the time of year, use the snowmobiles, skidoos. That's something I really enjoy. And it eases transport for the research that I do. So March, February, April, those months are quite good for traveling, not on foot. It also eases coming back in case of a polar bear encounter, that should be mentioned. And then we'll literally do whatever our project demands. We will do jumping jacks if we're getting cold, and then return when we're done for the day and have our next meal. So it's a maybe repetitive rhythm, but it's actually quite contemplative sometimes, and it's a simple life that is centered around producing the best results that we can get, and it's quite satisfying because it's hands-on. I think sometimes in research we're sitting in front of a laptop and we're digging through files as everybody else, but coming to this place is inspiring in the sense that we do see and encounter what we are studying, and I always come back revitalized. I come back with new motivation and just a deep sense of gratitude for actually experiencing this, and yeah, treasuring it.
And it's a very interesting location because, as you say, Dorothea, we're completely dependent on ourselves here and keeping ourselves safe and keeping the wildlife safe. And yet at the same time, the outside world is incredibly present here. So we're talking to you kind of through the internet. There is a super fast fiber optic cable that goes from us here to Longyearbyen to the Norwegian mainland, which is how all this works. And over the course of the last year or so, we've now got mobile phone coverage here. So you can get 4G kind of voice and data coverage here, which has changed kind of life here at the station. But all the station leaders are very keen to make sure that doesn't kind of damage the social life here and the community, and they're taking lots of measures about that. And it's particularly this part of the Arctic and is governed by the seasons. And so there's a big celebration every year when the sun comes back. There's a kind of almost still a sort of a celebration as the light goes, because you're recognizing that the year is turning, and there's that slight sense of sort of hibernation and quieting down in the winter. So yeah, there's a good social life here, but some people will stay for 2 years if they're working kind of for the Norwegian companies. For some of us, our teams were here for a week, 2 weeks, a month or so. So yeah, it's a very collegiate, friendly industry.
Yes, and I've eaten here too, and I can confirm they serve vegetarians. And I've also been to the bar, which is open twice a week. So yeah, there's lots going on here. While we were speaking, we had a follow-up question of what is it like to live in 24-hour daylight or 24-hour darkness, and do people have to do certain things to adjust to this?
Yeah, I mean, people do adjust. I think there's a subconscious adjustment to more light gives you more energy and you will make the most of it. I think that is something that happens during 24-hour daylight. You might be exhausted enough to just fall asleep. Anyway, as a researcher, having done a full day of field work, that might be the case. At least it's the case for me. But I would say that it's quite special. Living and working here reminds me of the importance of a daily rhythm that we easily take for granted in the UK or wherever we are based, where we have more of a daily rhythm. So here, when there's no light rhythm, we're sort of challenged to find that in ourselves. And it reminds me how nice it is to have a daily sunrise and sunset. So there's a natural rhythm that fosters health, if we're honest. And living in 24-hour daylight on that end can be a challenge. And the darkness is not as dark as it may sound, because you have the northern lights, there is the moon, there is snow covering the ground that is very efficient at reflecting that sort of light, and you get used to it. You might get your head torches out and you will nevertheless not be stuck inside, because this place is incredibly inspiring and just awe-inspiring.
Anything you want to add to that?
Well, it's kind of, you think of it as being what you get is a very long summer and a very long winter and an incredibly short spring and autumn. So within the space of kind of 6-8 weeks, it's gone from 24-hour daylight to effectively 24-hour darkness. So those transition months are kind of really special. As you say, you get this beautiful kind of blue light at kind of dawn and dusk, and that just gradually kind of shrinks down at the end of the season and then kind of grows again at the end. So it's a beautiful time. And in the UK station, we don't get to experience that so much because we tend to be open more in the summer and the spring. But for Norwegian colleagues who are here all year round, I think that's something really special for them to experience, and that's very valuable.
Great. We're coming to the end of the hour now, but I just want to thank you both so much for answering all our questions. And thank you very much for asking such interesting questions. It's been a real pleasure to hear these two talk about everything to do with the Arctic, and we hope you join us for our next webinar, which will be coming up soon. And thank you.